On December 8th, a military spokesman of Ukraine warned on national television that the Russian army is advancing simultaneously on several frontline sections, and that the country must now prepare for intensified winter attacks. According to him, Russia is increasing the pressure in the direction of Pokrovsk and in the front arc near Escalating, while wave after wave of drones and guided aerial bombs are being used. Russia clearly wants to disrupt our defensive lines while our troops are burdened by winter conditions, the spokesman said. At the same time, residents in Kyiv reported powerful explosions during the night. Air defense units had intercepted several Shahed drones, but falling debris caused fires in 2 districts of the capital. In the southern region of Kherson, according to official statements, Russian artillery shells again hit residential areas. 2 people were injured. Explosions were also reported from Odessa and Dnipro, while the local administration in Zaporizhia confirmed a strike on an industrial facility. Parallel to this, the political tension surrounding President Volodymyr Zelensky continues to grow. A current poll circulating in Ukrainian media suggests that an increasing number of citizens are losing confidence in the political leadership due to corruption scandals, delayed reforms, and the cancelled elections of 2024. A media report also claimed that Zelensky allegedly fears the United States might withdraw support if political conflicts in Kyiv escalate further, a scenario publicly denied by the government, but still causing unrest. Meanwhile, Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin spoke during a military meeting in Moscow of steadily expanding control over several frontline sections. He emphasized that Russian units were advancing as planned and stated that Ukraine was suffering high personnel losses, figures that cannot be independently verified but reflect Moscow's narrative. Welcome to our channel, where we analyze the latest events in Ukraine with precision, context, and clear explanations. The developments of December 8th paint a worrying picture. Military pressure on the front line increases. Cities are repeatedly shaken by attacks, and at the same time, political unrest in Kyiv is growing. Is Ukraine heading toward a phase in which external military threats and internal instability collide? We look at the key details, backgrounds, and implications. On December 8th, according to the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian forces intensified their attacks along several key frontline sections. Particularly affected were the areas around Pokrovsk and Escalating, where Russian assault units attempted to advance through concentrated infantry attacks and the use of guided aerial bombs. According to the military spokesperson, Russia is now deploying wave tactics, repeated attacks in short intervals intended to exhaust the Ukrainian defenders. The spokesperson explained that winter weather makes defensive operations difficult as soldiers are exposed to cold, muddy terrain and longer reaction times. In Kyiv, nighttime explosions alarmed the population. Several Shahed drones were intercepted by air defense, but falling debris caused fires in residential neighborhoods. Videos circulating on social media showed burning roofs and damaged cars. The city administration reported that emergency services were deployed in 2 districts. In the south, Russian artillery once again hit residential areas in Kherson, injuring 2 civilians. Further explosions were reported from Odessa and Dnipro, while in Zaporizhia, an industrial facility was struck. Local authorities confirmed that 1 building sustained significant structural damage. Parallel to the military escalation, political turmoil in Kyiv is increasing. A survey published in Ukrainian media indicates that trust in the political leadership continues to decline due to corruption investigations, stalled reforms, and the postponed presidential elections. According to the report, a growing number of Ukrainians fear that political instability could weaken the country's defense capability. Additionally, media speculations intensified after a report claimed that President Volodymyr Zelensky allegedly fears the United States might reduce support if internal political conflicts worsen. Although the Ukrainian government denies this scenario, the report triggered discussions about Kyiv's dependence on Western aid. In Moscow, President Vladimir Putin stated during a meeting with military commanders that Russia was steadily expanding control on several frontline sections and claimed that Ukrainian forces were suffering high personnel losses. These statements correspond to the Kremlin's narrative and cannot be independently verified. Overall, December 8th reveals a convergence of military and political pressure factors, a development that could influence Ukraine's strategic decisions in the coming months. The developments on December 8th can only be fully understood when placed in the broader historical and strategic context of the past months. For weeks, Russian forces have been intensifying their attacks on several frontline sections, especially in the direction of Pokrovsk, a region whose importance has continued to grow since the capture of Avdiivka in early 2024. According to military analysts, Russia is now trying to expand control over strategically important transport routes through a combination of infantry assaults, guided aerial bombs, and drone reconnaissance. In many battles, Russia is increasingly relying on so-called storm units, which carry out rapid targeted attacks supported by artillery and drones. Parallel to this, the Ukrainian side has been weakened by internal political tensions for months. The postponement of the presidential elections due to martial law, corruption scandals involving several ministries, and delays in reforms have contributed to a climate of uncertainty. According to Ukrainian political scientists, this has led to decreasing trust in the government and has made discussions about Zelensky's political future increasingly intense. At the same time, Ukraine's dependence on Western military and financial assistance continues to grow. The United States remains Kyiv's most important supporter, but political disagreements in Washington have recently repeatedly delayed aid packages. These uncertainties, combined with the intense Russian attacks, fuel fears that Ukraine could find itself in a strategically disadvantageous position. President Putin's statements reflect Moscow's long-standing narrative that Russia is gradually expanding control over the Donbass and that Ukraine is suffering heavy losses. Although these claims cannot be independently verified, they are used by Russia to demonstrate domestic strength and to increase pressure on Kyiv. Another factor is that Russian drone and missile attacks are now increasingly targeting energy infrastructure. The repeated strikes on Odessa, Dnipro, and Kherson indicate that Russia is pursuing a strategy aimed at weakening civilian supply systems before the winter. This not only affects the population, but also places additional pressure on Ukraine's logistics and the military's operational capability. Thus, December 8th must be understood as part of a broader development in which military escalation, infrastructural pressure, and political uncertainty reinforce one another. At the military-technical level, the events of December 8th show how strongly Russia is now relying on a combination of drone swarms, guided aerial bombs, and continuous artillery fire to exert pressure on Ukrainian defensive lines. According to Ukrainian military reports, the attacks in the direction of Pokrovsk and Ocheretine follow a pattern that has been observed for several weeks. First, reconnaissance drones identify Ukrainian positions. Then, guided aerial bombs are used to weaken the fortifications. Finally, infantry assault groups attempt to push forward in short, intense attacks. The winter weather additionally complicates defensive operations. Muddy terrain slows down the movement of vehicles. Cold temperatures increase reaction times, and drone visibility varies greatly depending on wind and fog. Ukrainian soldiers report that Russian drones often fly at low altitudes during cold nights because thermal signatures are easier to detect under these conditions. In Kyiv, the nighttime drone attacks highlight another problem. Even when air defense successfully intercepts Shahed drones, falling debris continues to cause fires and damage to civilian infrastructure. This forces emergency services to maintain high operational readiness, a burden that strains resources and personnel. In the south, artillery strikes on Kherson follow Russia's long-standing tactic of shelling populated areas located near the Dnipro River. The destruction of residential buildings and the repeated injuries to civilians underline how unstable and dangerous the situation in this region remains. Meanwhile, in Odessa and Dnipro, explosions once again demonstrate the vulnerability of industrial and logistical facilities. Zaporizhzhia, which has repeatedly been the target of drone and missile attacks in recent months, reported severe damage to an industrial building, a reminder of how deeply Russia's strike strategy targets infrastructure essential to Ukraine's functioning. At the same time, Ukraine is attempting to adapt its defensive tactics. Mobile air defense units are being repositioned. Electronic warfare systems are being used more frequently to jam Russian drones, and troop rotations are being accelerated to reduce fatigue among soldiers. Nevertheless, the pressure remains immense. The combination of guided aerial bombs, infantry attacks, and constant drone flights places Ukrainian forces under continuous stress and forces them to react more quickly than their logistical limits sometimes allow. Thus, from a military technical perspective, December 8th represents a further escalation stage 1 in which Russia intensifies both the frequency and the tactical complexity of its attacks. Internationally, the events of December 8th triggered a wave of reactions, particularly because the growing military pressure coincides with increasing political uncertainty in Kyiv. In Washington, analysts discussed whether the United States might intensify its demands for political reforms in Ukraine if internal tensions continue to rise. Commentators warned that corruption scandals and declining public trust could complicate cooperation between Kyiv and Western partners. European reactions were mixed. Several governments reaffirmed their support for Ukraine, but behind the scenes there is growing concern about how long the country can withstand the combination of military and political challenges. Diplomats from Central Europe emphasized that weakening trust in Ukraine's leadership could have direct consequences for the cohesion of Western alliances. In particular, the postponed presidential elections continue to be a topic of discussion as they raise questions about long-term political stability. Meanwhile, Russia is attempting to use the situation to its advantage. President Vladimir Putin emphasized during a military meeting in Moscow that Russian units were advancing as planned and that Ukraine was suffering high losses. These statements are part of the Kremlin's narrative, which aims to present Russia's military operations as successful while portraying Ukraine as weakened. In addition, Moscow is increasingly using political narratives to undermine trust in Western support for Kyiv. Reports circulating in Russian media claiming that the United States might reconsider its support for Zelensky further fuel this formation strategy. International security experts warn that such narratives could destabilize Ukraine from within by increasing doubts about the durability of Western backing. Meanwhile, human rights organizations expressed concern about the growing number of civilian casualties caused by Russian artillery and drone attacks, particularly in Kherson and the Odessa region. The combination of diplomatic pressure, information warfare, and military escalation creates a complex environment that could significantly influence the strategic decisions of all actors involved. For Ukraine, maintaining political stability is now just as important as defending the front lines. The developments of December 8th open several possible scenarios that could decisively influence the situation in Ukraine over the coming weeks. In the worst-case scenario, Russia would continue increasing the frequency and intensity of drone and guided bomb attacks. If Ukrainian defensive lines in the area of Pokrovsk and Ocheretine come under even greater pressure, there is a risk that Russia could achieve localized breakthroughs. Simultaneously, repeated strikes on Kyiv, Odessa, Dnipro, and Zaporizhia could lead to extensive damage to infrastructure, overloading emergency services and deepening humanitarian problems. Politically, this scenario could intensify internal tensions in Kyiv, especially if trust in political leadership continues to decline and external partners express concerns about stability. Such a development would significantly weaken Ukraine's negotiating position in the international arena. A medium scenario assumes that Ukraine can stabilize the situation despite the strain. In this case, Ukrainian forces would maintain their defensive lines even if under heavy pressure and limit Russian advances. Repairs to infrastructure would proceed quickly enough to prevent long-lasting outages in major cities. Politically, the government could partially regain trust, for example, through transparent anti-corruption measures and closer coordination with Western partners. Although Russia would not achieve decisive successes, Ukraine would continue facing significant logistical and political challenges. In the best-case scenario, Ukraine succeeds in significantly improving defensive capabilities against drones and guided bombs. With additional Western support, particularly in air defense, electronic warfare, and ammunition, the country could stabilize the frontline sections and reduce the effectiveness of Russian attacks. Politically, reforms and communication measures could strengthen public confidence, while international partners present unified long-term commitments. Such a scenario would give Ukraine greater room for maneuver both militarily and diplomatically. However, experts emphasize that all scenarios depend heavily on external factors, the weather, the pace of Western aid deliveries, and the scale of Russian attacks. The coming winter weeks will therefore be a critical test both for Ukraine's military resilience and for its political stability. The events of December 8th once again show how closely military developments and political uncertainties in Ukraine are connected and how quickly shifts on one level can influence the other. The increasing pressure on Ukrainian defensive lines, the repeated drone and missile attacks on major cities, and the noticeable rise in internal dissatisfaction create a situation in which both the military and political leadership are simultaneously under strain. On the military level, Ukraine faces the challenge of protecting key frontline sections in winter conditions while adapting its air defense systems to Russia's growing use of drones and guided aerial bombs. Each new wave of attacks requires rapid responses, redistributions of resources, and constant operational readiness measures that are demanding both logistically and personally for soldiers. On the political level, the declining trust in leadership, the postponed elections, and ongoing corruption scandals could weaken the government's ability to act. Even if the speculated fear that the United States might reduce support is officially denied, the mere existence of such discussions shows how fragile the political situation has become. At the same time, Russia attempts to exploit these developments through intensified attacks, political narratives, and targeted information campaigns. President Putin's statements about steady progress and high Ukrainian losses are part of a strategy intended to undermine confidence in Kyiv and strengthen Moscow's negotiating position. Internationally, the reactions underline how concerned many partners are about the current course of events. Western states must simultaneously maintain their support, manage their own political debates, and prepare for possible new escalation stages. Thus, the central question remains: will Ukraine succeed in stabilizing both the military front and the political situation? Or is the country heading toward a phase in which external attacks and internal instability mutually reinforce each other? We will continue to monitor the developments. If you do not want to miss any of our analyses, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, and share this video. Your support strengthens our ability to continue reporting independently.